So today I'm going to talk about everything that you need to know about pursuing a law major. Just to give you a sense of who I am, my name is KHammond. I did my PhD in sociology at the University of Cambridge, and I'm in the last year of my law degree at the Faculty of Law at McGill University. I've broken this presentation up into 4 different categories. I'm first going to start by talking about choosing what degree to pursue. Second, I'm going to talk about choosing a law school. I'm then going to talk about preparing and applying for law. And finally, I'm going to end with talking about what the possible career opportunities are for international students. So in terms of choosing what law degree to pursue, there's 4 different options. So the first and probably the most common to a lot of you is the JD. The JD allows you to practice law in countries like the United States and also in Canada. And generally, in order to apply for a JD, you have to have completed an undergraduate degree or at least 3 years of an undergraduate degree. This kind of varies based on the school and based on the program. The second is called an LLB or a BL, so it's basically a Bachelor's of Law. This allows you to practice law in countries like the United Kingdom, and it's often taken in place of an undergraduate degree. In Canada, at McGill University only, it's also called an LLB, but the LLB in that case is basically the same as a JD because you have to have taken an undergraduate degree before you pursue that degree. The third one is called the LLM, and this is an advanced law certification. It's basically a master's of law. And in order to pursue an LLM, you usually have to have completed a JD, an LLB, or a BL in order to apply. The last thing is the Doctor of Law. So this can be called a JSD, an SJD, or a PhD. And in order to apply for this, you usually need a JD or LLB or LB, and also an LLM. So in terms of picking a law school, there's, I would say, 5 things that are worth considering. The first is law school rankings. The second are the types of programs. Third are concentrations and specialties. Fourth is location. And fifth is kind of a category that I've just called other that fits a bunch of little things that might be worth thinking about as well. So I'm just going to walk through each of these in turn. So the first thing are law school rankings. So I'm not going to walk through all of these. I've just listed them here to give you a sense of what schools in what countries are usually ranked as some of the best. That being said, there are a ton of other schools that I have not listed here that are equally amazing schools and worth considering. These are just some of the ones that consistently seem to come up on lists as being some of the strongest rated schools. So the next thing that's worth considering is the type of program that you would like to do. So of course you could just do a JD, you could just do an LLM, or you could just do a PhD, but there's also ways to combine these degrees, and these are things that you might want to think about. So for instance, it's very common to see JDs that are offered in conjunction with a master's program. So sometimes the JD is offered in conjunction with a Master's of Arts, or it can be a Master's of Public Health, or a Master's of Business Administration, all kinds of things. So for instance, if you think that you are very interested in business law, it might be worth considering doing a JD MBA and getting both of those things together. So for instance, Stanford University offers a number of joint degree programs and actually gives students the chance to design their own joint degree program. NYU, on the other hand, offers a program where students who are taking a JD at NYU can also earn an MPP or an MPA at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Another thing that's worth considering is that you could do a joint JD and PhD program. So Columbia University, for instance, offers enrollment to combine programs where students can get a JD and then they can also at the same time be working towards a PhD from departments like biological sciences or psychology. Another option is that some people who are very interested in health law, for instance, might be interested in doing med school and law school together. And so Duke, for instance, offers an opportunity to do your JD and your MD at the same time and to complete this in entirety in 6 years. The next thing that's worth considering are the concentrations and specialties that are offered at different schools. So different schools are famous for different kinds of laws and have different kinds of focus in law. So some examples include criminal law, health law, public international law, corporate law, and environmental law. This is just a small selection of all of the concentrations and specialties that exist. If you can think of a topic, it's almost certain that there's a law school that focuses on law in that specific area. And so if you are going into law school with a passion, for instance, in environment, and you think you're really going to be interested in environmental law, then it's worth looking at schools that have a specific focus in environmental law, because it means that they're likely to offer more courses in environmental law. They're probably going to have research groups in environmental law. There might be a law journal devoted to environmental law. And there's certainly going to be more profs and more research that is devoted to this specialty. So this is something that is really worth considering if you know already what type of law you feel very passionate about. The next thing that's important to consider is the location. And I would say that choosing a law school based on location is more important than basing a decision of where you want to pursue an undergraduate degree or something else based on location. And that's for a number of reasons. So the first is that often law schools will offer people the opportunity to do things in the community where they get the chance to actually work in the law. So if, for instance, you are really interested, again, I will use the example of environment, in environmental law, then it might make sense to choose a law school that is in a location where it's got a lot of outdoor environment space. So going to the University of British Columbia, if you're interested in environmental law, makes a lot of sense because you will end up focusing and working in community organizations that are interested in environmental law. The second important aspect about location is that it can play a big factor in where you want to work in the future. So if you want to work as a lawyer, you're going to have to write usually what's called a bar exam, and this is usually region specific. So in Canada, this changes by province. In the States, this changes by area. And so you are usually writing an exam ultimately after law school that is specific to different states. And so getting accustomed to the local laws in those states can be beneficial to you later. The last thing, of course, is that wherever you go to school, you're likely to build your networks, and networks play a huge influence in helping you get jobs. So for instance, if you go to school at NYU and you're really interested in working in a big firm in New York, then it gives you the chance while you're in law school to build up those local networks that can help you get a job once you're done. So the last category is just what I've called other, and I've grouped a couple of things into this. So firstly, it might be worth looking at how many people get jobs right out of that law school. The second thing that can be worth looking at is the size of the school and the number of students in the classes. So it's often the case that larger schools are going to have a wider course selection. They're going to have more extracurricular activities, like more law journals, for instance. They might have a bigger library. They may have more library resources. Smaller schools, on the other hand, might have less of these things, but they often have smaller class sizes and more one-on-one attention from professors. So just think about what's important to you and what kind of environment you're looking for, and these things might influence which law school you want to go to. All right, so when it comes to preparing and applying for law school, there's 4 major components. And I'm just going to walk through each of these in turn. So the first one is your prior university degrees and your GPA. So first things first, it's important to note that you can apply to a JD from any undergraduate major, whether it be literature, history, psychology, music, whatever. Law schools actually really like having students that come from a diverse set of disciplines, and it really actually adds to the environment in law school. So don't feel like if you did your undergraduate degree in a topic that's not super related to law, that this is going to impede your chances of getting in, because it's not. The second is that GPA is very important for getting into law school. If your GPA when you finish your undergraduate degree wasn't awesome, you might think about, for instance, doing a master's degree or gaining work experience before law school. Doing well in a master's degree can help to boost a GPA that's a little bit lower, and gaining work experience before law school will give you something to talk about in your personal statement. So even though it doesn't matter which undergraduate major you do before applying to law school, it can be very helpful to have an understanding of what law is, especially when you write your personal statement, and I will come back to this. But so for this reason, it might be important to consider taking an undergraduate elective course in law, or interning in a law office, in a court, or an office where lawyers work, just so that you can get a sense of what being a lawyer actually entails. If for no other reason, it might help you figure out whether you actually do want to apply to law school, because law school is a lot of work and it's a big commitment, and so you generally want to have an idea that this is something you want to do before you apply. Another thing is that your school alumni office might be able to put you in touch with graduates who work now as lawyers in fields that interest you. So if you're really interested in sports law, for example, they might be able to put you in touch with someone who now works in sports law, and then you can have the chance to maybe ask them about their work, what it entails, what does a day in the life look like for them, or you might be able to even go into their office and shadow them for part of the day. So the second component is writing the LSAT. So a couple of tips for the LSAT. The first is that it's really good to begin preparing early. Some people are very used to writing standardized tests, and this will be very familiar to them. Some people are less familiar with that, so that in itself is a reason to start preparing early. The second thing is that it can be really helpful to take a course to help prepare yourself. So for no other reason, a course is going to help you understand what the different sections of the LSAT are. It's going to give you a sense of what test A will look like. It'll give you some tips in terms of how to approach those sections. So it can be a really, really good introductory way to orient yourself with the material and then to begin to prep working through it. The third is that all of the prior LSAT tests are generally available, so you can either buy them or a lot of them are now available online. And I can't stress how important it is to do these as practice, because this is what you will be looking at on your test day, so the more familiarity you have with these kinds of questions, the better. Another thing that's really important about practicing is that it's important to simulate the actual test day. So what often makes the LSAT hard for people is firstly that it's a very long test, so it involves a lot of endurance. And second of all, that you're on a very tight timeline while you complete the sections. So since this is half the battle, it's important to mimic these conditions when you're practicing. So when you practice, do a full test, do all of the sections. Make sure that you have a clock beside you and that you're timing yourself so that you're really mimicking what the conditions will be on the day of the test. And trust me, this will make you feel so much more comfortable when you go in on test day. Another important thing to consider is taking your first LSAT early. It's often the case that people are not totally happy with their first score, or they might think that they want to try again. So if you take your first LSAT early, then you have the chance to sign up and write it again before your application is due for law school. The third component are your letters of recommendation. Generally, law schools ask for 2 or more letters. It depends on the program, and at least one of these has to come from an academic source. So a few tips on how to get great recommendation letters for law school. First of all, build a relationship with the people who you are going to ask to be your references, and start doing this early. So, for instance, build a good relationship with a prof that you work for, or a prof that's teaching one of your classes that you love and that you're really excelling in. The second thing is that it can be really good to diversify your recommendation letters. So if, for instance, the school asks that you have 2 letters and one from an academic source and one can be, for instance, from a job, it can be good to have a letter from someone who's your boss at work and someone who's a prof, because this will help to show that you can excel in multiple situations. So in the classroom environment, but also in a work environment. It's important to ask early because profs especially are usually really busy, and to make sure to ask in person. This will help to jolt the person to think about who you are and what are the things that they can write about in that letter. Another thing that's really important and may seem really obvious is to make sure that the letter is going to be positive. So usually when I ask for a reference, I say, would you be able to write me a strong recommendation letter rather than just a recommendation letter? Because what you're going to need for law school is a very strong recommendation letter. You want someone who is going to be able to boast your achievements. The next aspect is you want to choose references who really know you. So I would actually say that in a lot of situations, it's more important to have perhaps a less well-known professor write your reference if that person knows you better than a professor who you don't really know and who you only met once or twice by taking their class with 400 other people. It's usually best if you have a reference who knows you, because it really is evident in the letters that they can speak to who you are as a person and what your qualities are. The next thing to consider is that it's important to tell them what law school is actually looking for in a candidate. They might not actually know what these qualities are. Law school can be different from an undergraduate degree in psychology, for instance. And so it's important to explain to them what these kinds of things are. So public speaking skills, for instance, hard work, motivation, these kinds of things are important for them to highlight. Critical thinking is another one. Oh, sorry. It's also important to remind them what would make you a great candidate. So when you send them your CV and other information to help them write the letter, you can send them a list of highlights of things that they observed you doing that you think show off why you'd be a really great candidate. It's possible that they may have forgotten some of these things, and so it's really great for you, number one, to remind them, and number two, to link these things or these accomplishments that they've seen with succeeding in law school. And the last thing is that it's great if you can have the referee actually tailor the letter to the school. So for instance, if you're applying to a school that is very well known for business, having a referee talk about the fact that they've already seen you working on business projects and really having an aptitude for business, and that they think that then you would fit well into the business part of the school you're applying to, can be really, really helpful. The fourth component is writing your personal statement. So there's a number of components that can make a personal statement especially strong. So the first is that it's really great to grasp the reader in the introduction. So figure that an admissions committee is reading hundreds or thousands of applications, and a lot of these are going to be looking the same. So if you can grab their attention right off the bat, this is going to help improve your chances of getting in. The second thing is that I urge you to think about your life as a story up until this point. And so you want to craft what your personal narrative is in a creative way. What in your life has happened up until this point that leads to you applying to law school? So how does this story kind of play out? The next thing is that you want to make sure that you show that you know what law school will entail and that you have the skills to succeed in law school. And you want to give specific examples of this. So for instance, law school involves often very focused on point writing. So you could talk about, for instance, a time that you were on a debate team and you had to craft your debate arguments in a very focused on point way. And this, for instance, would help to illustrate why you would have the skills to succeed in law school. The next thing, and this kind of ties back to what I was saying about having a personal narrative, is that you want to show how law school fits into your ultimate career trajectory. So what do you want to do in the future, or what do you think you want to do in the future? And why will law school help you achieve this or achieve the goals that you want to fulfill? So give them compelling reasons as to why law school fits really well into your narrative up until this point and why it's going to help you to fulfill the goals that you have. The last thing is that you really want to convince the reader that you have done the research on their school and that you have thought about why you'd be a good fit for that school. So you want to show off what that school is going to give to you. So for instance, if they are very well known for business law and your career involves something in the realm of business, this would be that school will help you develop those skills in business law. But also it's really important that you want to show what you're going to bring to the school. So if you have a passion for business law, you want to be able to show them that passion and how it's played out in your life up until this point. What skills, what thoughts you have about business, how you're going to bring those into the community, how you're going to contribute to a business law journal that exists, for instance, or what creative thoughts you have about business that you can implement or whatever. You want to be able to show them that you're going to be an asset to that school and you're going to fit well into the environment there. So just to walk through a couple examples from personal statements that I've seen. So if you look here at the before section, this was an introductory sentence that said, I would like to go to law school because I have a great interest in helping people. I have this interest because of a volunteer experience building a well in a nearby village. So it's not a very exciting first sentence. It doesn't necessarily capture the reader's attention. So another suggestion for how to rework this was, as the sun set over the village, my teammates and I watched the locals pump the first drops of water from their new well. 2 years ago, I became involved with a school club called Wellbeing. Another example is here. I have communication skills because I'm a literature major and I'm leader of my school debate team. The problem here is that you're just listing that you have communication skills instead of showing your reader that you have communication skills. If you're on the debate team, then you probably do have great communication skills. So you want to make sure that you're illustrating these rather than just listing that you have this skill. So a way to rework this, for instance, was, one of my greatest assets is my communication skills. Through my major in literature, I have learned how to develop a clear and compelling argument. As captain of the school debate team, I have gotten a great deal of practice verbally articulating my ideas. Last spring, our team won first place in our division. So here you're showing off how you've developed those communication skills and how effective they are by, for instance, showing that you won first place in your division for the debate team. So here's another example. So it says, I think Georgetown is a very famous school, and it would please me very much to go to such a reputable institution. That's great. Georgetown is going to feel good that you understand what a great school they are, but it doesn't really show that you've done the research into why you would fit there, because most people know that Georgetown is a great school, but you need to go a little bit further than that. So for instance, an example would be, I am drawn to Georgetown because of its specialization in corporate law and the opportunity for students to gain practical skills through the corporate law practicum. So here it shows that you've actually done your research into what the school offers. And secondly, it shows why you would fit in that school in terms of what they offer. Another example, so before the personal statement read, I think that it is quite fascinating to learn about law in all sorts of countries, which will be good when I work on international policy. I started to think this when I took political science. So again, the fact that law is quite fascinating is not a super compelling reason for why this person wants to pursue law. So there actually was a lot more to this, and so with a little elaboration, they were able to make a stronger point about why they wanted to pursue law. So with a little reworking, it turned into a political science course that I took in my undergraduate university that taught me about the Chinese legal system, made me eager to learn more about other legal systems. My future goal is to work on international policy for an NGO. Learning about different legal systems allows us to learn best practices that we can implement in order to create more effective international policy. So the last thing that I want to talk about are career opportunities for international students who have a law degree. So the first thing is, of course, there can be career opportunities in the US for somebody who has a JD. So this in itself is worth looking into. The second aspect is that international organizations and NGOs, think for instance the UN or the World Health Organization or developmental banks, will often hire people who have a JD, because not only does a JD show that you have a certain set of skills, but it also, of course, shows that you can practice law in the US potentially. The third is that a lot of global firms that are outside the US actually do practice US law. And so being trained and able to practice US law does not need to happen in the US itself. So it can happen at one of these firms that practices this form of law just outside of the country. The next is that in business and industry, it's often really important to understand US law, because so much business and trade happens with the United States that this can be a real asset in working for a big business firm internationally. And the last is that in the academy and also in research, having an understanding of law in the US can be very, very helpful, especially if you're going on to do a master's of law or a PhD in law, because this will give you an understanding of how law will work internationally and globally, and maybe your specialty is in the US, which is totally fine, and that can be your specialty even if you don't work in the US. So that's all that I have today. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope that I have helped you think about what the application process for law would look like and what the possible careers could be if you are applying to do a law degree.